So hello everybody. This is another one of our interview series about how to deal with uncertainty and change. And today I have the lovely Gina Piccalo here, and she used to be a journalist. I didn't even know that you were a journalist.
Oh,
But I
really?
love that. Yeah, I love that you were a journalist.
Yeah.
And studied the occult and all types of things for a long time. And she has an astrology certification from Kepler College since 2014. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And she teaches webinars and consults people, with astrology. And do you do coaching as well, like just life coaching stuff too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how our sessions end up because I have clients who see me monthly. They end up being like, coaching.
Right. So great. Okay. Yes, that's so similar what I do as well.
Yeah.
Great. So Gina, she can be reached on Instagram at Gina Piccalo Astrology. And we also have a website for her, ginapiccaloastrology.com. So if you guys want to get in touch with her, the information will be below this video. So you can just click on those links or, copy and paste and whatever and check her out. All right. So today, Gina and I will be talking about 2022 and kind of like how we feel the energies are unfolding. And I think we can both agree that we're not big on predictions necessarily, but we're big on, aligning ourselves with the energies and understanding what the collective energies are, understanding how we can use these energies on an individual level for ourselves, for our own, evolution and for our own growth, right? Gina, would you say that
Definitely.
that's kind of how you work with it as well?
Definitely.
Yeah. And so we'll just chat about that a little bit. So Gina, um, what's your take? Like, if we just had to like put like one sentence for 2022, what would your take on 2022? Like, what do you feel is like the main theme? And I'll give my opinion on that too. But I just was curious if you had.
Well, I did in my own presentation on 2022, I did have a few words. I did like the idea of transcendence because of the Jupiter-Neptune energies that we're going to feel pretty strongly in the first half of the year. And I guess I tend to be maybe more optimistic. And the fact that the Saturn Uranus is somewhat separated for a large part of this year,
Right.
compared to 2021. I'm
Yes.
hoping that the benefits of the hard work that we've all put in with the Saturn square of 2021, if you've really been nose to the grindstone and use that energy to sharpen and hone whatever it is that you're trying to reinvent, then it's likely that this first part of the year, I mean, the fall of 2022 is a different story, but I feel like at least, moving into that space of spring and even there's
Yes.
some places in the summer that also feel like we have an opportunity to see what is good, what has improved. Because we will have a lot of planets in their own, a lot of, Saturn and Jupiter and Neptune all in their home signs.
Yes.
We do have a new eclipse cycle too. And I feel like the North Node being in Taurus, that maybe there's
Taurus-Scorpio.
more stabilizing forces. Maybe
Mhm.
the eclipses will be.
You are definitely more optimistic than me.
I know. I mean, I try to
Not that I'm not,
see
but I'm
the
uh,
best case scenario. I mean, I know there's some
scenario.
other things that
Uh-huh.
are going to be hard.
Uh-huh.
But let me hear what you have to say. I want to hear your.
Well, I would say, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying to a certain degree, for sure. I think that Jupiter-Neptune conjunction that will be exact in April, that, we're feeling for most of the spring, is definitely going to be beautiful. I mean, because that's so heart-centered and it's all bringing us or just inviting us to go back into our heart, right? And it's all about realizing our dreams, connecting to something that's universal, right? That sort of has like a universal flavor to it and that supports us in connecting and becoming more one, right?
Mhm.
Whether that's in our own lives or collectively speaking. So I definitely see the optimism there, where I think, I mean, I think with the moon nodes and the eclipse cycles in Scorpio Taurus, I think there's a desire for stability, for sure. But I think with the South Node in Scorpio, we definitely first need to dig out all the dirt from our basements and, clean out all the gook, before we can find stability, and I think it's a process, right? I mean, it's an 18 months process. So I do feel that, in the beginning, and this is what I feel with moon nodes, maybe correct me if you feel that that's differently for you, but with the moon nodes, I always feel like the beginning of a new cycle with the moon nodes is sort of like more focused on the South Node aspect, where we're realizing, what is, we're getting to see where is the overdrive, because the South Node can be so intense, right? And the desire to move towards the North Node is always there. But in the beginning, I feel like we're just kind of like trying to see like, what is this that we're doing here?
Right,
It's sort of like this new energy,
Right. A little bit of a shock.
Right. And as we're getting closer to the end of that cycle, the end of that 18 months, I feel like that's when we're more into that, okay, yes, stability. We're getting closer to the North Node and closer to balancing those polarities out with each other, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there is a real little bit of, certainly because Uranus is going to be very involved in these eclipses.
But that's the other thing, right? Is that Uranus will be connected to.
And so it can go one of maybe both, like a shock to the system, like the rug gets pulled out, and a great awakening at the same time, real clarifying sense of what has got to change to get us to that place of stability. And like you said, letting go. Scorpio can be scary. That energy of South Node in Scorpio can be like going to the mat, like rock bottom. Yeah. I mean, I could see how that could be.
I think it depends on where you're at personally too. I think each person individually will obviously have a different experience depending on how much work they've already done, right? Because if you're already in a place where you've cleaned out your basement pretty well, and you know your unconscious better than most people, then this next phase that we're moving into in 2022 will be much more of a confirmation of the work that you've done and really moving to that next level. Right. But I think for a lot of people who are not doing the work, and I think there's plenty of people out there who don't, right? We can agree to that. For a lot of people who are not doing the work, it might be a pretty rough, it might be a pretty rough go at times, with, I feel like I always want to compare it with Scorpio. It's like these waves, like being in the ocean and there's like this wave crashes over you and you get pulled under for a moment. And as long as you relax, you're going to be fine and you come back out and you're going to be like, oh, I'm alive, But if you panic, right, when that wave comes over you and you panic and you go, what is this? Oh, and then you're going to swallow some water. And when you come back out, you're going to be like, oh, I'm exhausted. What was that?
Right.
You're still going to say, oh, I'm glad to be alive. But,
right.
But you might be a little exhausted from the tumbling of the, going under the waves. So
exactly. Yeah, I mean, surrender is a big piece of this, isn't it? Like, I think of that South Node in Scorpio, and even with Jupiter-Neptune, it may be that the Jupiter-Neptune in April prepares us for the surrender that's required in May, in the April-May series. Maybe that's what we can lean into. I mean, I think of the, 2022 relative to where we've been 2020 and 2021.
Yes.
And
it's a step forward.
It does feel like a step forward. And I mean, I don't want to be Pollyanna about it, but I guess comparing it to where we've been, I feel like I always think of clients who have strong Capricorn or Cancer signatures who've just been through 2020. And I say, look, that was a once in a lifetime. That's never going to happen again. That collection of intense energies on those personal points. Oh, yeah. So everything forward from now is going to feel like an improvement to some degree, having all of that there. So yeah, it's still tough. Yeah. I mean, we still have the Pluto return for the US. We still have
mentioning that
October to get through. I mean,
yes. What about October?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things like the Mars Saturn, which I think is happening in, is that also happening when we have the Jupiter Neptune? We have a Mars Saturn in Aquarius, squaring off with Uranus right around the same time that we have Jupiter Neptune. So April is intense
That's in April, yeah.
with kind of a mixed bag of intensity. But
Yeah,
then when
Pluto
we
is stationing as well in April.
right, didn't notice that.
Or it
Yes,
starts to, anyways, at the very end of April, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Um, and to just mention about Pluto, and this is a very wide orb, but something that I've started researching is the Pluto Uranus
Cycle.
what sextile, I think it is, right?
Pluto Uranus sextile.
Not Pluto Uranus, Pluto Jupiter. Is that what it
Pluto
is?
Jupiter.
So yeah, Pluto will be in, wait, let me look. No, it's Pluto Uranus. Yeah, when Uranus reaches 10 degrees away from Pluto, it will begin to be in a 10-degree trine next year, 2023. Mm-hmm. But there is a moment this year that it dips into that 10-degree orb just for a little bit. So it's not like we're going to be feeling it so much personally yet. That I feel like is going to be the signature of years into the 2020s. But that's epic. That's going to change.
That trine is not going to be exact until Pluto is in Aquarius, though, right? Pluto in Aquarius, and then I think Uranus in Gemini.
Right. But in the earth signs, it does begin to sort of dip into the territory that, at least like Tarnus usually uses a 10-degree orb, and it does reach that 10-degree orb a little bit this year, a little bit next year before it goes into Aquarius in 2023. Right. And even when it's, out of sign, I feel like what that indicates to me is that we're on the outside curve, the very outside curve of a dramatic, epic shift forward that, we really can't predict how that's going to manifest, but that it will change everything. And so I like to look at where we're at now, even with that Pluto return, as this moment of we're on the verge of the rebirth part of the death cycle.
Right. I feel like the Pluto return in the US, right? I think that's a big deal because, of course, the United States is a huge has sort of like a huge role that it plays in the global economy and in the global political scale and everything. So this Pluto return, even though it is happening to the US, I think it will impact the whole world to some degree, And I think this return really requires of the US to take a good look at, where are they overreaching in terms of their own powers, right? Where are they overreaching in terms of as a world power, or where are they at in terms of like their own empowerment process as a country, like do I empower or do I disempower, when it comes to government, when it comes to policies, when it comes to actually Pluto in the US chart is in the second house, right? So it's in the house of finances and money, you could say, right?
Yeah. And I think that reckoning is always going to have, because it does feel like the continuation. And I'm curious what you think about, the build up to the exact return being harder than the return itself, or not.
Well, I was thinking that because there's 3 returns, right? You have the first return. What are the dates for that again?
February 20th or 22nd?
February 11th, I think.
Oh, I have
it? Yeah, no, you're right. February 20th, July 11th,
right,
and December 28th, right?
Right.
And so the first one is sort of going to be like the initiation of like, this is what this return is about, right? So the first return, we get to see what this return is actually about. I think the second one in July is going to be more powerful in a way because the Pluto in the United States chart is retrograde. And so the Pluto return on July 11th is the retrograde Pluto return. So that will resonate much more closely with the United States in terms of the natal planet also being retrograde, right? So I think that will definitely be like I think will be the stronger return. And then December 28th, I think is just going to be, that's when we're going to see how are we going to move to the next level? How are we going to do it? And I think, I always say within 5 degrees when it comes to an outer planet.
You have a really small orb, tight orb.
For outer planets, yes, because I feel that 10 degrees, that's a long period of time with a Pluto transit, I mean, if we consider a Pluto transit in 10 degrees, that would have had to start at 17 and a half degrees of Capricorn, and that was a long time ago. 17.
I mean, even some of the, more ancient Hellenistic astrologers will look to 2008 when Pluto first entered the second house, entered the Capricorn.
Obviously, when it first entered, something began, right? That was in resonance to that energy, of course.
That financial collapse in 2008. So I almost wonder if that's going to be connected, whatever happens this year. And I've done some research on Biden's chart, wondering how that Pluto return and the eclipse cycle are going to affect our leadership.
Right.
Because that eclipse cycle is really activating Biden's chart.
Yes. And then also in the United States chart, Pluto in Capricorn answers to Saturn in Libra in the 10th house in the United States chart, which means that it comes back down to leadership, right? It comes back down to who is leading the country, who is leading us into a new phase of our into this rebirth. I mean, it is a rebirthing process, right? Pluto return. Right. So who's leading us into this rebirthing process? And Saturn in Libra suggests that in order to have a good leadership, we need to have balance, right? Saturn in Libra. So do we get this kind of balance or this balanced approach from our current leadership is the question.
Well, I'm just wondering how all of this building up to the midterms in November, when we have an eclipse on the day of, right? And I don't remember if Uranus is involved with that. Not quite.
I mean, personally, I have a pretty extreme view, I think, which is that I think politics as we know it is going to be over. It has to completely change,
in 2022, or
I don't know if it's going to change this year per se, but I think that there is a sort of like a needing to change how the system works completely, and I think Pluto is very good at, just going, like just kill it all, like let's take it all out, everything that's not working, and let's just bring in the new. And look, I'm not saying it's going to be necessarily, it might not be easy in certain places. But I think that whenever there's a transformation taking place with Pluto, it's usually that, yes, it can be very difficult to move through this transformation, but at the same time, there's also this new seed that's there already. Right? Like, I mean, I like to compare it to like giving birth, right? Like when you give birth to a child, something's dying, which is the old you, because once you have this new seed that pops out of you, you're no longer going to be the same person, right? So there's a huge transformation taking place in terms of your own self and your own life experience and how you connect with things, right? And that's inevitable if you give birth to a child, right? I mean, you have children, so you know that, right?
Yeah.
but as you're giving birth, right? It might be, the birthing process might be difficult, right? It might be like a lot of huffing and puffing and like feeling exhausted, and it might be painful and all that stuff. But you also know that the new that's coming is sort of like, is going to be so much better than what you're leaving behind or what you're giving up, or what you're going through. So I think with a Pluto transit, and I think with what we're going to be doing with the US, with this Pluto return, I think that people know that whatever we're doing is not working, right? I think a lot of people know that whatever is happening right now is not working, right? To a large degree. And I think that, I mean, I don't have the answers. I don't know what would work better necessarily. There's a lot of options, right? But I think that we as people need to come together and that's where, when Pluto moves into Aquarius, that will become more,
That's an exciting transition, I think.
Right, it is. Because then the power will move more towards the people rather than stay with like the authority figures.
I mean, the only thing I'm concerned about with that is some extremism. I mean, Aquarius can be extreme. Sure, Aquarius can be fascist. I mean, we did see some of that during the Hitler times at Aquarius. There's a strong Aquarius signature there. So I do have reservations about what happens on November 8th, building up to this last Pluto hit in December. I just wonder, like you said, what the aftermath of the destruction of the system is. Do we have, our value system is, if we look at it in that terms of the second house, the United States value system has been very broken and toxic for a very long time. It was built on slavery and, a system that was, enslaving people. So that has to be part of, like, I've always felt like, I don't know how we get out of the Pluto return without a reparation of some form. I don't know how that isn't going to be part of the conversation. So I think it is going to be somewhat of a shocking outcome. And I don't even know what shocking looks like anymore, because it's like, we've had so many waves of shock. It's just like we're shell shocked as a nation at this point.
Over what's the word? We're drenched in like
trauma
and shock.
And grief. I mean, grief has to be part of this too, because I wonder about this Pluto return, because of all the Saturn, Pluto on our Pluto, all of the 2020 stuff that was so much about death and destruction that we're still reconciling with, and that's one of the things I was looking at with the April stuff. When do we get to cry as a nation? When do we get to fully grieve the enormity of this trauma? Like, when does that process start? Because we're still in survival mode of Pluto right now. And so I wonder if that Pluto return at the same time is that cracking open of the grieving process, of the psychological process of Pluto, and being able to reconcile with what we've just survived. I'm very curious to see. I've done a lot of research using a COVID chart that based on when the first person was
diagnosed,
identified as contracting it in November 2019. And I wonder how that Pluto shift from Capricorn to Aquarius, does that spell the end? Is that the end of COVID as we know it? Because that progressed Pluto, or that transit of Pluto, finally leaves the Capricorn area where it was born, and it moves into a whole new form. So I just wonder how really the next 18 months are going to be so pivotal for us as
one of the things that I think is that the Venus-Mars conjunction that is in Aquarius, in 0 degrees of Aquarius, I think that's going to be a big turning point for us as well. And I know that the last Venus-Mars conjunction, as far as I remember, was in Virgo.
Okay.
And, Virgo being about health, wellness, well-being, right? And I feel like we've definitely that cycle, that Venus-Mars cycle, that is sort of like starting anew in like 0 Aquarius, which is the same degree as Saturn and Jupiter came together.
Right.
So there's a significance there collectively for all of us, but also individually, we're going to connect to that collective place, right?
Really interesting, yeah.
And I think because that cycle, that Virgo cycle is ending and an Aquarius cycle is beginning, I'm wondering if that might be the turning point in terms of the pandemic, in terms of like moving away from, all the fear about the virus and all the fear about being, that because eventually, a pandemic is something that ends. Right. I mean, It doesn't go on forever and ever and ever, even though it feels that way right now, but it will end. And I feel like with this last variant that we've had, that's much milder than the other variants that we've had, and also much more easier to catch, right? Transmittable. We might see that this will be
a turning point,
right? Because once everybody's been exposed to it, and once everybody's had some kind of a symptom, but doesn't die from it, right? That's a good thing in a way, I think, because then we can start to get stronger in our immune systems as a collective, and we can start to let go of the fear, right? We can start to let go of because I think the fear, and this is a very Plutonian thing, of course, right?
And in Capricorn,
the fear is what's keeping this alive in a way, right? I mean, what's keeping it going, because everyone is so, and I'm not saying everybody's scared, because not everybody is, but if we look at the collective, we could agree that probably more people are scared than not scared, about various things, whether that's the virus, or whether that's the economy, or whether that's people being vaccinated or not being vaccinated, or whatever it might be, that you're scared about. But I think that there's a lot of fear in us as a collective. And I think Pluto is the planet that invites us to open our hearts and to not stand in fear, to stand in our own inner power, right? Knowing that we are okay and we're going to be okay. Right? I mean, that's the empowerment process. That transformation is to make conscious what we're scared about, right? And to then stand with that fear, but in a powerful way, not in a way where we have to push away or protect or, get angry or rageful about things, but where we can actually go, okay, this is where I'm at, and I know I'm going to give it over to some higher power, or I'm going to surrender to whatever this is about. And I know I'm going to be okay, and everybody else is going to be okay, Not that that's necessarily the complete truth, because not everybody obviously is going to be okay.
Well, okay, after the fact too, having survived. So that whole concept of we have survived something collectively, we've had to let go of enormous, millions of people have died. So we have to reconcile that we've come on. I feel like what you're talking about is the other side of the massive crisis, the massive death. Yes. And that's what it sounds like with this. So this would be in March, right?
That's March 6th. So March 6th is, and that's also, of course, when Jupiter and Neptune are moving very closely together. Right. They're already in a conjunction with each other. So I really think this spring is somewhat going to be a turning point. And also, if we think about the eclipse points from November and December, there's going to be a square to the December eclipse point, right? When the sun moves into Pisces,
right?
Where and again, turning point with a square to the eclipses. So I do feel that that we're going to turn the corner in some way, right? In the spring. And I mean, Jupiter is going to move into Aries in May.
Right. And that, I would love to hear what you have to say about that. Because that is going to be
my God. I mean, that's going to be very different. I mean, that dynamic will change very drastically in May, right? Because Jupiter in Pisces and Jupiter in Aries is so very, very different from each other.
Right.
I think we will go from a huge heart opening, and hopefully the huge heart opening will happen to most of us, where we can really let ourselves feel that, without getting too delusional about things, but still grounded in reality, but keeping our hearts really open and connecting on a heart level. But I think Jupiter in Aries, if that heart opening has taken place, we can then step into a more active place of how we want to move forward with this heart opening, right? So I think Jupiter in Aries is sort of like the next step after a heart opening, or after a big letting go, right? Because Pisces can also be a letting go, letting go and releasing something, and opening our hearts completely. And then Aries takes that energy and goes, I'm ready, let's go, let's move into like our true selves, and Aries wants to be itself, right? I mean, it wants to kind of just hone in that energy that it is, and wants to sprint forward. It's kind of a fast moving energy, isn't it, Aries?
And carve new territory, cut a new path. Like I almost wonder if the way things shift after the Pluto return in February, after the 0 degrees Aquarius turning point of the pandemic, maybe it becomes endemic at that point, and then into the Jupiter-Neptune, like all these 3-4 steps of massive things changing and turning into a new space, that Jupiter is massive movement of people, or people cutting their losses, leaving, like healing, ending, releasing in Jupiter in Pisces, and going in a totally different direction, gangbusters in that direction. So it's like, I wonder if we have a lot of new things starting.
Yes, a lot of new stuff. I think so too. I mean, Aries is that energy, right? And I mean, look, when Uranus was in Aries, right? We saw this like very radical, like, I need to be me, and like, I'm just going to do whatever I want to do, and
right.
We saw a lot of violence as well from that, with mass shootings. But with Jupiter there, of course, the energy is much more, it's much more jovial, it's much more like, yeah, I'm ready to take this on. I'm ready to move in my own direction. I'm ready to do what works for me. And not necessarily in a violent way. I don't see Jupiter as violent, right? Like Uranus can have that edge to it, right? Where Uranus can really go into kind of a crazy place.
Right.
Whereas Jupiter, I don't see as violent necessarily. I see it more as, sometimes it can go a little bit overboard, like it can be a little bit too much, it can be a little bit too enthusiastic, right? But Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius, which is a fire sign. Aries is a fire sign. So Jupiter in Aries feels good, right? It's in a fire sign. So this exuberance and this enthusiasm and this, obviously it can always go in a lot of different directions. But best case scenario, I would say we'll have a lot of entrepreneurial stuff happening. We have a lot of fun, a lot of humor. We'll have a lot of people just doing things that they've been wanting to do for a long time, and they're just gonna,
yes, that's how I think of it.
Caravan and go into the desert, or go into onto an island or whatever. Just get their own lives however they want it to live, like a
race car starting. It's kind of how I think of it in an image. It's just, going for it.
Going for it, exactly.
Big time,
So in a way, you could say that by May, by the time Jupiter moves into Aries, which will be May 10th, I think, it's a good idea to complete all that processing and all that inner work by then, so if we as individuals can focus on how can we do our own inner processing connection to grief and anger and feeling disempowered or feeling like we're lost in some way, like how can we deal with that processing of that until May 10th, so that by the time May 10th comes around, we're ready.
We're clear.
We're clear. We're at the starting line, and we're like ready to take off. Right.
And yet that's the same time that Mercury is going to retrograde. It'll be stationing. But what's interesting is that well, those are complementary. It's air fire and very social. Mercury will be in Gemini at that point.
That's
so
true.
This does feel like a getting back together, I mean, and definitely hitting the road to get back together with people and reconnecting does feel like a strong signature for that Gemini Aries.
Connecting Mercury retrograde, right?
Right.
We are in a Mercury retrograde right now and in the Venus retrograde. So
right.
We're definitely, this month is definitely sort of like a very strong inward journey of reconnecting with things that we need to finish up or complete or just get to know a little bit better and figure out what's going on.
And I feel like it's so much there's, I don't know if nostalgia really covers it, but I do feel like there's some looking at the past with the Venus and Capricorn, looking at what we've been through and where we are in that process. And then the Mercury retrograde does feel, I mean, I'm on the East Coast, so it's like, because of all this snow, a lot of us are really kind of huddled down and in our own space. There's a lot more isolation that's sort of emphasized, and people are feeling that kind of clapback of the pandemic, like, oh no, is it going to be like it was, and I keep feeling like shouting from the rooftops, no, this is not the same.
Yes.
This is temporary. But
it's almost like a little setback before we move forward.
Exactly. Right? It feels like we're going to finish. This is like a finishing up of the real dreary, hardcore cycle before this massive launch. And maybe that Jupiter in Aries is where it really feels like the massive launch, where we're really out there again and exuberant and stepping into our courageous,
courageous. I was going to say more courageous as well. Yeah.
That brave effort to sort of start anew, really start anew, so I mean, maybe, I think what you're saying, it all makes sense. The way that this, these 3 or 4 things that are hitting in those first 3-4 months of this year, setting us up for what is that new chapter of the eclipse cycle?
Yeah. Well, because the eclipses are, let's see. Yeah, that's going to be April, May, right? So end of April, middle of May. Actually, there's going to be an eclipse on the day of my birthday. Hello.
Is your birthday May 15th?
It's May 16.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm like,
this is a big year.
It's a big year for me, clearly.
I've been through one of these before, not that long ago.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting experience having eclipses on the sun.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely going to shift, I'm sure, how I relate to other people, right? Because it is the lunar eclipse that's on my birthday, right? So it is a opposition to my sun.
Right.
And I have a natal opposition to my sun as well. Like I'm a full moon baby. So
wow.
So yes, it's gonna be an interesting almost like a re-resonating to my birth chart, right? Like the eclipse.
A real activation of all that.
Real activation. And then of course Uranus is gonna be there as well as part of that. And Venus will be in Aries at that time as well. So we'll have Jupiter in Aries, we'll have Venus in Aries.
Oh my God, wow.
This is my solar return chart, okay?
Wow.
So I don't know what's gonna happen to me this year, but I feel like I'm gonna be like almost feel like I'm gonna be like a racehorse, waiting to come out of the boxes, like, okay, let's go.
Yeah, so plan some big what are you wanting to launch in your solar return, from birthday to birthday? What is it that you want to cut a new path, launch into a new territory? Exactly.
And that's my 1st and 7th house.
Okay.
So it is connected to relationships, I think, maybe having more collaborations, maybe connecting more to people. I mean, that's something I definitely would love, is have more collaborations with other people. Because I feel like I'm too small to do it.
Right.
Do it all, you know, like.
Well, aren't we all? It's you have
Yeah.
there's power in numbers, and
Yeah, exactly.
you know, I think it's we haven't talked about what all this Aquarius activation means for astrologers, but it's
Right.
significant. It is significant, and I feel like, you know, in the time that I've been dabbling in this from the early 90s, you know, when I was just a little amateur interested in it, to where we are now. I look at some of these young people on Twitter, and I just think this is it. This is the Renaissance. This is the awakening, you know. This is the Aquarian.
Lot more astrology interest than there ever used to be, for sure. I mean, even in the 10 years that I've had my business, like it's definitely gone blown out of proportion with people being astrologers and people being interested in astrology. You know, it's definitely been exploded is maybe too extreme to say, but it's definitely been much more so than in the 90s when I was studying astrology. You know, there were not a lot of young people that were studying astrology. I was one of the very few young people that were in a group. Whenever we go to a conference, there would be a lot of people that were 10, 20 years older than me, but nobody in my age group, you know, or not very, very many. And that's definitely changed, you know.
It's that I think I'm wondering, it's the Neptune, Uranus, and Aquarius generation.
Yes.
That's so
old enough to be.
Yeah. And I have a 16-year-old daughter, and she's all about it. All of her friends are all about it, you know, in a way that teenagers are. But I mean, it's so available now. It's in everything. It's built into their apps that they use. You know, they're able to use astrology in a way that we never had the opportunity to do because of software.
Yes.
Which I think is only going to increase. I've been doing some research on quantum computing, and I'm like, we're going to be, you know, what's the word? Obsolete within a decade or so because of quantum computing. They're just going to plug it all in there. Right. And then you won't really need an astrologer as much to interpret. I don't know. They've been saying that since computers were invented, that, you know, but
I mean, I think that need for human contact and support is still always going to be there, because people really need to be heard and they need to be witnessed.
Reflected,
you know?
Yes.
And reflected back to. And I think that's something a computer can't really do in the same way as another human being can, you know?
True. Yeah.
So I'm not too worried about that necessarily, but yeah, there's definitely going to be, I mean, it will shift how we do it, right? Because information will be available, but then the, maybe more the coaching aspect of it will be more important, you know, right? Information.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so what about the end of the year in 2022? Because one thing that I saw was, you know, Mars in Gemini for I don't know, 5 months or whatever, 6 months, and going retrograde in Gemini, and then we have Jupiter in Aries and Mars in Gemini. Then of course they're sort of connected, right? Because Mars rules Aries, so. So to me, that signifies also a lot of like needing to, you know, rethink things, you know, like, and come up with stuff that sort of like is maybe a new even education system or something like that. I don't know, like Jupiter in Aries, Mars in Gemini. I mean, I don't know, like how are we going to move forward with education, right? Like, because through the pandemic, a lot of it had to change so quickly.
Right.
With going online more with stuff.
Right.
And, you know, maybe there's something around that I don't know. What do you think in terms of?
I mean, I always think, well, arguments. Like, I immediately go to, we're going to be arguing with ourselves as a nation, just because of, you know, the nation is a Jupiter ruled chart. Mars in Gemini is the US has Mars in Gemini natally. So it does feel to me like that things become maybe more heated in terms of our collective experience. And hopefully, because Jupiter is a benefic and may bring some some plan or some way to resolve or maybe meet halfway with some of these like polarization experiences that we've been having collectively for what feels like forever. In terms of education, I mean, I definitely think Gemini, Mars and Gemini could bring maybe some of those problems because this is stationing retrograde right after school starts in the fall. Maybe some of those problems. Part what?
Yeah, it starts October 30th, right?
Yeah, so we will have been in school, in September. A lot of schools start in late August. Right. And even in that 1st of September, that's when you really looks like you really have Jupiter sextile Mars during that time. Mm-hmm. So maybe there are some problems that are, maybe there is a plan in place when they start school, and maybe that plan needs to be refined once Mars retrogrades, and it's going to be retrograde all the way until the first part of the year, 2023.
Yeah.
I mean, Jupiter, it definitely feels like that's going to have to do with individualized learning plans, maybe, figuring out a way to meet the needs
of different children, different lessons, depending on how far, where they're at. And yeah, you know what? I love that idea actually, because I'm thinking like, why does it have to be about age, right? Like so far in education, it's always been like, if you are a particular age and you get that curriculum and you study with everybody else who's that age, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody else in your class, no matter where they're at, whether they're brighter or less bright, or, whether they're have great learning abilities or not so great learning abilities, you're being put in the same pot with everybody else. But if learning is now something that can be individualized online, where people just go through the curriculum in their own speed, however fast or slow they want to go, right? Then that becomes something where certain kids can go really, really fast and just go through, 5 years of studies in like 2 years if they want to. And then other kids can take that time and can really like digest and go as fast as they can. And then just, steadily get to the end of, the curriculum or whatever it is that they're needing to learn in school at their own pace, where there's no judgment. It's not about, being good or bad or being brighter or less bright, but it's more about like, you have your own rhythm, you have your own speed, this works for you better than this, because we have a lot of ADD children, right, in the world. And those kids, they don't do very well with the class environment, with class settings. Mm-hmm. So for those kids, having something online where they can tune in, do it quick, like 20 minutes, and then tune out again, go play, come back, tune in, do another 20 minutes, come out, that would work for an ADD child so much better, right?
Sometimes, I think one of the things that this might create is a way to frame the education so that kids can catch up, because we do see this tremendous lag because of the 2020. There's a whole class of kids from age, that started kindergarten 2020, but didn't, up to probably 3rd grade, that are really behind, because you learn so much in those first 3 years.
Right.
And it may be that they speed up, or they, because of that fire air, the education process may compress a lot of learning just to get everybody on the same page. Yes. In that semester, or in this period of Jupiter and Aries, which lasts into 2020. Let's see what. Yeah. So it'll be in a good part of the first part of 2023, also a couple of months anyway. So maybe it's really assessing, the damage and coming up with some kind of plan. The other piece of this that I've seen looking at that Sibley chart over and over again is the labor disputes that have to be resolved. We got to get the teachers' situation figured out. And I think that's going to probably be a 2022 issue. I think, with Uranus where it is in the chart of the US, it does suggest, and maybe there's some way that can get resolved with the Jupiter in Pisces.
Yeah.
But there's a real that's going to continue to be an issue. I almost wonder about that Mars Gemini retrograde, bringing up some of the labor disputes issues. I mean, that feels like
I
this.
mean, it's in a teaching sign, right? Gemini is about teaching. So yeah, it could be that there could be some issues that might need to be resolved or come up around that time. For sure. Yeah.
I mean, I just think the pandemic has brought to light that it's just made those, and that's Saturn square Uranus too. It's
Well,
really,
that's still continuing all of 2022, right?
yeah,
So
it really
even though
sharp.
it's not exact anymore, like it was in 2021, I still think that we will feel that quite
Yeah.
a bit because Uranus will be involved in the eclipses as well. And so, it has to be a part of what we're still experiencing
Right.
this year.
Right.
It just might look a little bit differently. I mean, especially if we are moving into a turning point in the spring, like in May, April, right? If there's a turning point there in terms of the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
then the next, what is the next thing that people are going to have sort of like adjustments to make about, right? Because Saturn in Aquarius is definitely needing to take a look at our group consciousness, how are we connecting with like-minded people, or how we're connecting with our various affiliations in life.
And also the disparities within that group, like what that whole for the good of the whole argument has been so dominant during this period. I mean, it's been probably started with the Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter in Capricorn, in that area of Pluto and Capricorn for the US. But because I think it's all part of the United States kind of curriculum at this time. I think we established ourselves as a country based on the idea that all men are equal. And that was a lie, and so we're reckoning with the lie that we told ourselves for our entire lifespan of this country. Yeah. And so this whole Saturn in Aquarius and square Uranus and is, I think, a part of, okay, let's be really clear. And also the Pluto return, let's be real about what we really are based on and who is it that has all the freedom here, who really does have all the rights here. Right. And the people who have been, sublimated, ignored, and diminished as to build this country, that we built on the backs of the country, was built on their backs. They're right. Now being heard and being seen.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, such a big part of our reckoning with Pluto, and why all these labor disputes and all the healthcare workers, that is this whole other thing is the healthcare system and the education system. I think those are going to have to be reckoned with during the next, certainly this year. This year is going to, I think that will be another way we see the Saturn-Uranus square, is just those systems that are.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, ironically, I was just looking up when was Pluto within 5 degrees of its, the return of the US, and that started in January 2020.
Wow.
So that's really interesting, right? Like, so that Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, and Ceres was there as well, is kind of like, that's the beginning of that return in a way as well, and I think we can see that in America, definitely there's been, a lot of needing to take a look at how inauthentic we've been as a country, because Pluto wants authenticity, right? Pluto wants emotional authenticity. It wants the empowerment of itself, right? It wants to feel that there is like passion and power that comes from within, but comes from within in an authentic way. It's not a grab from the outside in. It's a thing that gets generated from the inside out and is an empowering to the people or out into the world, right? And so I think America has to reckon with the fact that what they've been doing for a long time has not been an inside out process. It's been an outside in process, of like grabbing rather than generating, empowerment. And I think so 2020 in a way has been the beginning of that realization of like, what are we doing? You know, like, how are we not empowering people? You know, like, why are we taking stuff away from people and not like how we're not like making sure that everybody's empowered, you know?
It made it very plain how there was that disparity of power, you know, how the frontline workers were the ones risking their lives every day so that the elite people, the people with the money, could eat in their homes and be safe. You know, same for healthcare workers, many of whom are underprivileged themselves, going out and making them, exposing themselves to this virus so that they could care for other people. So that feels like, that will probably be part of this. I mean, I would like to think that
the African American community as well, right? Having to still, in this day and age, in the 21st century, to still have to fight for equality, you know, which is crazy to think that's still even a conversation in this time and point in life, you know, in this country. And I think it's just that we as a collective now have to face the truth of all of that, you know, like, because it's been pretty clear to me before that already, but I think collectively speaking, it was maybe not so clear to everybody.
Right. No,
you know what I mean?
It was a lie that we continue to tell ourselves, that we were the country of liberation and freedom for all, and equal opportunity and all that. And equal, that was not true.
That's, I mean, America has a Jupiter-Venus conjunction, right? So there's this idealism, you know, that is very prevalent in America, where, you know, it's all about, oh, we take care of our own and we make sure everybody's good and all that stuff, right? But when it comes down to it, you know, it's way more complex than that. You know, there's a lot more in the shadows. And of course, Pluto is also the shadow.
Right. It's brought up, I think, what our real value system was. And our real value system was money. That's it.
Absolutely.
Greed. That was it. That was mainly it. And if those other things...
I think still is to this day. I mean, I think that, and that's why I think the political system needs to change, because, you know, as long as money is the motivation for everything that we do, it's never going to be empowering to everybody. You know, that little piece needs to shift. We need to get into a place where we can, you know, where people can serve the country as politicians, not because, you know, they have greater access to better friends and better networks and more money, but because they truly want to make a difference, you know. And the thing is, you know, I know that, you know, there's a lot of people in politics that probably have really good intentions, you know, that actually maybe really want to make a difference. But because of the way the system is built and is structured, it doesn't even matter what your intentions are. It doesn't matter whether you come in with the purest heart and you want to make a difference for everybody, because the system itself is rigged in such a way that it cannot function any other way than through the efforts of money.
Money, right. You have to make a deal with a corporation to get elected.
You have to make a deal. Exactly. To be reelected, to stay in office, to stay connected to your people, you know?
Yeah.
So unless the system changes, I think we're not going to see a lot of change. Because the type of people that are attracted to a system like that are always going to be the people that want to grab, never the people who are interested in, you know, empowering.
And I mean, I think that's one of the things that the pandemic has, you know, in a devastating way, has helped us realize. It has brought to light these things. You can't put this back in the box. What we now know from the Black Lives Matter, from the pandemic, making it plain how much the wealth disparity is, the fact that billionaires got richer during a time when everyone else was devastated. There's so many things that I feel like systemically we cannot ignore now. And every system of this country that we have has been revealed to be basically rotten and broken, and is going to have to be rebuilt. And hopefully that rebuilding process takes place, you know, as we move into, I think, Pluto and Aquarius, maybe.
I think so. Yeah. And I mean, obviously it will take time. Rebuilding always takes time, right? It's not something that happens within a month or a year, but I think it is something that as long as we keep the vision alive for that rebuilding to take place, and move steadily towards that, eventually we will. There's always progress. I mean, let's face it. I mean, there's always progress. Even if there are steps forward and steps back that happen in life, there's always progress that happens, because you just look at history and you look back at 100 years ago, and you can see, yes, there's definitely been progress from 100 years ago to where we're now. Are there still problems that we're having? Of course, because, that part of being alive and part of being human and part of living on this planet, I think that's part of it, is to work with, whatever is there, and to do our best to move through all the challenges that represent themselves whenever they do, whether that's individually or collectively, right? But we can say as a whole that most people, right, have a better life now than they did.
Well, yeah, sure. Yes. Right? Most people, I mean, yes. And there are many studies to show that our quality of life has improved as a whole. Yes. Regardless of race. It hasn't improved at the same rate for everyone in terms of, some people are way, way, way richer. But yes, it has improved. But
I mean, there were always rich people, right? Even 100 years ago, there were those 10% of people that were really, really wealthy. And we still have that 10% of people that are really, really wealthy.
But hasn't the disparity grown over the last 50 years or so? Or in terms of, I think how much wealthier?
I mean, I think what's shifted is the reach that the wealthy people have, right? Because wealthy people nowadays have a much bigger reach in terms of like what they can do with their money and how they can be influential. I think 100 years ago, a rich person maybe had a certain reach over a certain region or a certain area where they were able to dominate or able to have influence. I think nowadays rich people have probably a much larger reach. So I think in that way, I think it seems like it's bigger and more. I'm not sure that there's necessarily, I think in terms of percentage, I don't know if there's that many more rich people. Or that the disparity is much greater. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a little,
because if we look at 100 years ago, there were people who were lords and, they were aristocrats or whatever. And then there were people who were farmers. And there were a lot of people who were farmers and didn't have enough food and didn't, live well. They didn't even have running water in their house. They didn't even have a toilet in their house, right? And so I would say that disparity between a rich person and a poor person was much larger than it is now in those regards, in those more concrete physical regards, in terms of physical comforts, but I think the disparity is greater in terms of like the power and the reach that these people have now,
the concentration of power. Right. Yes, and it's more global. Right.
And it's more global. Exactly.
And so then that Pluto in Aquarius does feel like the power goes back to the people, does feel like there's more of and also a responsibility that people take, that they accept the responsibility for the collective, that maybe that's how that shift moving into next year might manifest as we move into the rest of the 2020s. Because I do think that the 2020s from that Pluto in Aquarius into 2030, that we're probably going to see societal change on a level that we haven't experienced in our lifetimes.
Yes. I think so too.
Where a lot of the lessons of 2020 really begin, and really the lessons since the beginning of this century, 2000. This has been a grim century. It started with 9/11 and it's just gotten progressively worse. We had this moment where, there was this ray of hope.
I know, we're the good old days. We're the 90s.
The 90s, I know.
Those are the days.
Yeah, those are the days. That was like the last hurrah before everything fell apart. But I feel like things will be much more societally. There's a real opportunity. I'll say that there's a real opportunity that if we decide to take it, that we can really improve things on a massive scale using Pluto and Aquarius. And
on a global scale, I think too.
On a global scale, that there's a real opportunity that if we all can come together in a meaningful way and pivot rapidly, you think about both Pluto and Aquarius have a lot of extreme qualities, make extreme changes very quickly. We could save the planet. We could improve things epically, best case scenario, it could be like the Aquarian age that we've all dreamed of.
What I also want to say to that is that, of course, each generation has its part to play, right? And the younger people, especially the generations that were born with a lot of outer planets in Aquarius, Neptune, Uranus, and Aquarius. I mean, that's going to be the generation that will probably, take the reins and go, here's what we're going to tell you guys,
Right.
Because that's an important generation, I think, because the generation before that was the generation with all the stuff in Capricorn. And that generation, they're a little bit more reserved, right? They're a little bit more like careful in how they're going about things, and change has to be sort of like step by step and has to move slowly for them, But the generation that has all the Aquarian stuff, they're like, let's go, let's do it.
And everything is okay. Everything, however you want to be in life, is okay with them. That allowing people to be their own individual, whatever that looks like, is okay and accepted. And technology is going to have a huge part in it.
Let me just say this. We've been talking for quite a while. So
we have.
Let's wrap it up. Is there anything that you would like to promote or anything that you'd like to say to the people who are watching? Anything you're doing currently that you might want to talk about?
Well, just my Astro School. I've been working on that. So that's an opportunity for real, beginner astrologers, people who don't really know much about it, but want to learn. It's a real easy way to enter into this world and learn some things about yourself and about the way that the transits and themes of astrology can help you cope. I try to use astrology as a way to
use it as a guiding tool.
Right. And I think the more you bring awareness to it, it's not like your life gets easier, but it does allow you to frame the narrative of your journey so that just having that narrative can be really helpful.
I agree. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So let me just say to everybody, this was the lovely Gina Piccalo, and she has a Instagram, Gina Piccalo Astrology, and GinaPiccaloAstrology.com is her website. So definitely check her out and go below this video to click on the links or to see where you can find her. And then the last thing I wanted to say is if anybody is interested, I'm still having a huge sale on my website. So if you guys want to check that out, it goes until January 23rd. So feel free to, check out all the whatever coaching, reading, sessions, webinars, courses, everything's for sale. So take advantage of that. And hopefully this was sort of interesting to watch, the two of us chatting about 2022. Any last thoughts that you want to share, about 2022 before we finish up?
I don't think so. I feel like we covered a lot.
We covered a lot, I think. Yeah. But I guess I would maybe say, in terms of the uncertainty that this Saturn-Uranus Square produces in some of us or all of us, to just be okay with not knowing, right? Not knowing what's next, because I feel like that there's an unfolding that's taking place right now, and to just honor the unfolding and to be okay with not knowing exactly what that unfolding looks like is going to give each of us definitely a peace of mind, and just help us be more calm and centered, and a little bit more connected to ourselves and the present moment, right?
Exactly. Like surrender to the process. That was something.
Right. Thank you. That's beautiful.
Staying in the moment, surrender to the process is really going to
Surrender
get
to the
us
process.
through.
Exactly. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gina. It was such
Thank
a
you.
pleasure
This has been a pleasure. It's so
with
fun.
you. Yes, thank you so much.
All right.